Sugali Sigwe Ganya Diletu Iangets. Hello, my name is Lizzie. This is my research presentation on child welfare and Indigenous identity. I just realized it did not record sound the first time. My positionality, I am from the Onondaga Nation of the Thames. I have a lot of family and friends that have been involved in child welfare, whether it be as a lawyer, whether it be as a minor parent, whether it be as a parent in general, and whether it be as a child going through it. I definitely believe in the Haudenosaunee community perspective on child welfare and child raising. It takes a village, and I definitely follow that more. And I wish that child welfare reflected that, but I know that child welfare can be very extremely harmful, and I kind of wanted to explore that. For my research concepts, I didn't really have a question, but I had guiding questions. I wanted to understand the current state of child welfare as it pertains to Indigenous children. I wanted to understand if it improved, how it improved, if it got worse, how it got worse, what influenced changes in child welfare since residential schools and day schools, what changes can I predict happening in the future, what changes might happen, will it be better, will it be worse, that kind of thing. From a methodology, I wanted to follow methodology that allowed me to understand the perspective of professionals in the past and present and assess how the handling of Indigenous child welfare has changed. I looked at this through academic articles. I looked at this through lectures. I like a lot from personal friends, and I've learned a lot through sitting through that. Don't always know how to cite it, but I have a different understanding of it, and I wanted to find ways that I could find that in an academic sense. But my next steps and the methodology I'd follow if I were to pursue this, I would like to interview professionals, Indigenous adults, as they leave the child welfare system. No one who's currently involved in the child welfare system. I don't want to re-traumatize anyone. But also parents that have worked through the system to understand how the system has handled child welfare and what policies they follow when addressing Indigenous families, and if they follow federal legislation, and how that looks for people going through it and how that affects them afterwards. For a brief literature review, I wanted to look at the federal legislation as provided by the Canadian Legal Information Institute, because there's federal legislation specifically when addressing Indigenous identified kids in the system. They try to pair Indigenous children with Indigenous lawyers, I know that, but that's not necessarily written in the legislation, but it does focus on child welfare, child well-being, and child preferences as well. And it was really interesting looking at that. I highly suggest looking at it, but it provides some very interesting points, and it also looks at reintroducing some different visions on what parties can be involved. And it also looks at customary care, which is something that I have a fascination with because it focuses on having Indigenous children in Indigenous placements. I also looked at looping effects in settler colonialism in the Indigenous child removal system. Specifically, this one focuses on the 60s scoop. So this kind of provides present day looking back and reflective ideas around the social workers that were working at the time and removing children from their families and putting them into the adoption system and what was kind of going through people's minds. And it looks at looping effects, which kind of focuses on settler systems and how social reproduction works and how that made it okay and justified some of the stuff that was happening and how it was a socially reproduced idea that led them in that direction. For the connection to my digital bundle, the Every Child Matters movement addresses the issue brought by past child welfare practices rather than bringing awareness to the current issues of child welfare. So, Every Child Matters, if you look at every shirt that you have, it looks at residential schools, but it never mentions anything about the continuation of children in a controlled system by colonial governments. And I think that there's a lot of harm in not recognizing that that's still going on. For my digital bundle, I wanted to create a design for an orange shirt that recognizes Every Child Matters as a movement, but includes the present day overrepresentation of Indigenous children in child welfare. Yamago, miigwech, nyawa, thank you for listening to my presentation.